Hi, this is Steve Stokely for Advanced Poker Training. In the last video, we looked at this page here that pops up when you click the Show Range button. If you haven't watched that video yet, you should watch it first. Today we're going to look at other screens you can get to from here. Just to recap, each row in this table represents a hand type our opponent might be holding. This row represents all the hands your opponent might hold with which he would currently have one pair. You can see here, it tells you how often we believe he has one pair. And there's a Details button next to that number, and if we click it, it will give us even more details about how we arrived at that number. Let's give it a shot. You'll notice this next page looks almost identical to the page we just came from, only it breaks the number down even farther. On the previous screen, we clicked on the Details button for one pair. On this page, we see various types of one-pair hands your opponent could be holding. He might simply be holding one pair, but he could also have a flush draw, or overcards, or both. He could have various backdoor straight and flush draws as well. A backdoor draw is a draw that requires two more cards to complete it. You can only have a backdoor draw on the flop. If you look at all these numbers, they all add up to the number we saw on the previous page for the total percentage of the time that he's holding one pair. And this value is again a weighted average, which also matches up with the number on the previous page. So this page is just a way for you to take a look at some other possible hands your opponent might be holding. Maybe you aren't worried about him holding a hand like bottom pair, but you forgot that he could be holding bottom pair and a flush draw at the same time, which is a pretty strong hand. Let's go back to the previous screen by hitting the Close button up here. Moving over to the example hands in the last column, you'll notice we can click on any of them. When we click on one, we're taken to a screen that analyzes our exact chance of winning against that hand. For reference, it shows your cards, their cards, and the board cards. This number here, 990, is the total remaining combinations of turn and river cards that could come. Let's take a quick moment to look at where that number comes from. As I'm sure you know, there are 52 cards in a deck. Between your cards, their cards, and the flop cards, we've already seen 7 of those cards. So that leaves 45 cards that we haven't seen left in the deck. The question is, how many different combinations of turn and river cards can come, given that there are 45 unknown cards left? The answer is, there are one of 45 different cards that could come on the turn, and that will leave one of 44 different cards to come on the river after that. But there's one catch. For this calculation, we don't care what order the cards come in. To account for that mathematically, we have to divide by 2. And there we get our answer. There are 990 remaining combinations of turn and river cards left in the deck. Going back to the previous page, our software was able to quickly deal all 990 combinations, and it gives you the results here. This is how many times you win, this is how many times they win, and this is how many ties there were. Your equity at the bottom is the percentage of time you won, plus half credit for any ties. So this screen is useful to help you get a feel for your exact winning chances against specific hands your opponent might be holding. Going back to the main screen again, there's one more button we didn't cover, and that's this More button here. The More button takes you to a screen where you can see additional examples of hands your opponent might have. I'll click the More button here in the row for one pair again. You'll notice on this page we see lots of additional examples of hands that your opponent could hold that give him one pair. The different rows are separated by your equity against those hands. For example, against the hands in this first row, we have a win rate less than 20%. These are hands we're in pretty bad shape against. You can click on one of these hands over here to see your exact equity against that hand. Notice, it's less than 20%. Our win rate gets higher and higher up until this final row, which are the hands with which our win rate is greater than 80%. Adding all these rows up, you'll notice we get the same number from the previous page. So to sum everything up, the Show Range button presents you with a lot of mathematical computations. Computations that would take you hours can be done by your virtual advisor in a fraction of a second. And that's what most of this is, just pure math. The only part that isn't math is your advisor's initial estimates of what hands your opponent is likely to hold, and how often he'll hold each one of those hands. To come up with those estimates, your advisor has to consider everything they know about your opponent. Not only what betting actions your opponent has taken so far in the hand, but also the factors showed when you click the brain button, such as their personality type and their position at the table. So what's the best way to use all this information? My advice is to not click the advice button right away when you're stuck with a difficult decision. First, try to think about what hands you think your opponent might be holding, and your overall equity against those hands. Then click the advice button and look at your equity as proposed by your advisor. If their estimate and your estimate are very different, then it's time to click the Show Range button and dig deeper to find out why. The final question you might be asking then is this: how do I use this equity number exactly? Is there a magic percentage, for example, anytime my win rate is over, say, 70%, I should raise? Well, it's not that easy. But it is true that in general you should be folding with your worst hands that have the lowest equities, checking and calling with your medium strength hands, and raising with your best hands that have the highest equities. The exact cutoff point will change based on the situation. Furthermore, there are exceptions to every rule. For example, sometimes you'll take your absolute worst hands with the lowest equities and raise with them. That, of course, is a bluff, and it's a critical part of any complete poker strategy. And there's also continuation betting on the flop. Sometimes you'll make a continuation bet just because you were the aggressive player pre-flop, even when your actual win rate on the flop doesn't justify betting from a purely mathematical standpoint. Well, that's about it for now. Thanks for watching all these videos, and thanks for being a member of Advanced Poker Training. Bye now.